So, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the National Network for Justice for one of our discussions in our fall seminar. The National Network for Justice is a national organization that seeks to strengthen the work of state-based organizations who are looking to reduce jail, prison, and detention populations safely and permanently. And I am Angeline Fraser Giles, the Executive Director of NNJ. And tonight we are pleased, for those of you who have been able to watch the film that we just showed, we are so very pleased to have Vivian Anderson, who appears in the film, and we'll learn a lot more about what else she did behind the scenes tonight. But Vivian is the founder and executive director of Every Black Girl Inc., a national campaign and program that centers and supports Black girls. Vivian has long been an activist and healer, working as a director of youth programming at the Harlem YMCA and executive director of Momentum Teens. Her work is rooted in promoting the health and well-being of youth, families, and communities of color. In 2015, Vivian moved to South Carolina, inspired by the Spring Valley assault, to create an organization to fight state-sponsored violence against young Black women. Since then, Vivian and Every Black Girl Inc. has grown into an organization advancing racial systemic change needed to have a world worthy of the genius and heart of every Black girl. And with that, thank you so much again, Vivian, for joining us this evening. We met, I guess it's been about a month at a women's conference, online conference, because everything is online.
I am woman,
now, right?
With Sylvia
I
High.
am woman, yes, with Sylvia High. And it was the first time I had attended this conference. I was invited by Trina Ramsey, and it was an excellent conference. And I was just like glued. You know, some conferences you're kind of multitasking. It was hard to multitask at this one because there was so much going on, and the after hours talk was just absolutely amazing. And you were a part of that. And I said, okay, whatever the film is, she's talking about young girls and school resource officers and violence in schools and trauma. I want to screen it. So thank you for agreeing to talk with us this evening. So there may be some questions that come through the Q&A, but I have a series of questions that I'm also going to ask you. So I guess the first thing I want to know is, when you saw the video, because you talk about it in the documentary, when you saw this video of this young girl being dragged in her desk, and how many scenes we have seen of officers throwing people down and being in schools, your instinct was, I have to do something. Most people would say, I have to do something. I have to call someone. I have to send some money to an organization in South Carolina. I have to do something like that. But your actions were to leave New York, and not many people will, again, do this, leave your home and go to South Carolina to see how you could help. So what prompted you to do that?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. That's the question, right? So one of the things was like I often say, I didn't see the video first. I saw Naya being released from jail, and it just still grabs my heart to this day when she said, I knew, because the reporter asked her, why did she stand? Like, why did she try to stop stuff when nobody else in the class, not even the adults in the room, were trying to do anything? And she said, I knew I had to stand because I knew she had no one else. And all I saw was a child holding a child. And it just didn't, I was like, well, wait a minute, we're doing all this work, because at that time, 2015, we know a lot of stuff was happening. I was working with Black Lives Matter. It was so much stuff going on. And I was just like, I really was like, I just got to go hug them, let them know it's going to be okay. I just wanted to wrap my arms around them. I just didn't know my 2-day trip was going to end up me relocating my life. So.
And when you left New York this happened in 2015. So was that the point you left and you stayed in South Carolina from that point?
No, what would happen is like I would go back and forth. I would because my intention was to hug these girls. So I had to find these girls, right? I didn't know like I have sisters who lived in Spartanburg and Greenville, which is like almost 2 hours away from Columbia, South Carolina. So I was like, I have to find somebody who knows these girls so I can get to these girls and see how I can support them and their families. So it was back and forth for a while. And it took about a year for me to like, first, it was quickly when I met Naya. But with Shakara, it was a little bit more difficult because they had moved her out of her foster home into a group home. So it was like the navigating of systems, right?
Right.
And then as I was looking for them, I meet other girls and I meet other women who are just like, well, that's just what happens with Black girls. Or that's just what I'm like, something's wrong with that problem. That's a problem. Like, wait a minute. And, I really look to see how can I support community who might be doing work around it. And it wasn't so much work being done around it. And so the ones who wanted support, like coming in and supporting and lending some of the experience I had from other work that I had done. And so it would be back and forth, back and forth. And then it would be like officially like nonstop, like 2017 when I officially moved, and I've been here ever since. But I had I started the organization. I had start renting a home. So, renting centers so I can do programming with kids, then rented like a home because I also was housing kids and families who are needing emergency shelter at that time. And like whatever the community was telling me they needed, I was just looking to provide. But I always said I wasn't going to be a drop-in activist. And if I was going to do this work at the level I wanted to do this work, I knew I had to be in the community to do the work. So I relocated.
So that's really interesting. That struck me in the documentary where you arrive in South Carolina and your expectations were that there were going to be all these protests and all this pushback against what was happening to Naya and potentially what was happening in the schools, but you didn't receive like that type of welcome from organizations that were on the ground doing the work. Because as someone who has had to go into communities, that's what you do first. You try to look for what organizations are on the ground already doing whatever the work it is that you're doing. And my work has been criminal justice. You go in and you look to see who's actually on the ground doing that. Some of the things that came out in terms of the young woman who's doing her master's thesis and going to different sites in South Carolina is that that oppression and repression of the culture. And do you see that that is partially what happened when you went there, is that people just fearful of trying to buck against the system because they've just become accepting of that's what happens.
Yeah, I think for me, like I said, there wasn't a lot going on. People were really like, you came here because some girls got in trouble. And I'm like, in trouble? Did you see the video I saw, right? And what started becoming very clear to me, because one of the things that I learned when I first got to South Carolina had the third largest rate of domestic violence deaths, right? And so how we can treat women like female bodies was also part of it. Because even the kids was like, what are you talking about? It's happened all the time. And it became so norm. And it was like, oh, the police must be right. The girls must have done something wrong. And so as far as like connecting with the organizations, there weren't a lot of organizations doing it, right? The work in this way, like really going to go, let's challenge the system in this way. It's always, how do we fix these kids? Not how do we dismantle and create a new system? How do we fix these kids to fall into all these systems? So yeah, I was a little shocked. And also, I'm coming from New York, coming down to the South. So of course, I'm the outsider. Community members are like, we don't know you. Like, are you going to be somebody else who come in, stir up something, then you leave and we got to live with it. And so that was another reason why I was like, yeah, so if I'm going to do this work, I'm going to have to be here.
Right, right. So in terms of what also I found interesting was that there was the situation with Walter Scott that had happened,
Mm-hmm.
where
We had.
he was running, away from the
Mm-hmm.
police. And if
Not for
not for
video.
video, that would have been, uh, police saying that he tried to grab his taser. I think that's what he was saying, his taser, his baton. That if not for video, we would not have known that that is actually what happened, was that the police shot this man running away, shot him in his back, and that officer ended up getting the 20 years. Um, it's also happens right after the killings at Mother Emanuel. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that because so many things happen, in our communities over time, you forget the time frame when things happen. And so all of that is happening. And then there's this incident in this school. So do you think people saw that as like, okay, this is racist, even though they saw that it was something that happens? They think that this always happens. Did anything that happened prior to this have anyone thinking that, oh, well, maybe this is not really the way things are supposed to be? Or was you just, come into a situation where people just think, well, they're just racist down here, they want to fly the flag, this is what we have to deal with?
Yeah, and I think another thing, yes, yes to everything you just said. And then I think another thing that sits with me is that um nobody died physically. For me,
Mm-hmm,
both those girls, part of them were killed that day, right? And so
mm-hmm,
there were
mm-hmm,
pieces of their lives they can never get back, and they
mm-hmm,
have to relive. So there's pieces of their, like, the childhood was ripped from them, their innocence was ripped from them, and because there wasn't a death, it's like, oh, it'd be all right. And I think that was part of it too, where folks would be like, oh, it'll be all right, they're going to let them back in school, and then they just go on as business as usual. And it's just like, no. And when we talk about the school to prison pipeline and push out, what creates the space, because you heard both, Naya was clear, I'm not going back. And, not to say that just because I came here and I work with her family, who know, like, because so many, we were able to wrap some people around her. What if she had, if she only she can answer, if she even wanted to go back to any school, like, right? And that's what push out looks like. And that was part of it for me. It's like making sure their education wasn't interrupted as well.
mm-hmm. And that's a big issue, the push outs. A lot of people don't realize that once you are labeled as problem, or there's a
Mhm.
situation that occurs in the school and authorities are called in, that you become this problem child that no one wants in a class. And so administrators, teachers tend to push you in a way that you don't want to come back into that situation, right? That you don't want to engage with your teachers, because for a teacher to call a officer on you, why would you want to go back into that situation?
Well,
Even if it didn't end up with him pulling her from the desk like that, why would you still want to go into a situation where the teacher's not respecting you? Because she says that she asked the teacher to go and see her counselor, right? And he should
mhm.
have let her do that. So a lot of what you're seeing with a lot of these kids being pushed out of school and not ending up graduating, then having to go get their GED, you talk about there wasn't a death, but they
There
died a
wasn't
little
a
bit, right?
physical death. There
It
wasn't a
wasn't a
physical
physical,
death.
but it was that
That
mental,
mental,
that mental,
emotional. Mhm.
exactly. So could you talk a little bit about the trauma that not necessarily these girls, but just in general, that you experience, that some of these young people experience, and not wanting to go back to that traumatic experience? Because I can only imagine, something happens to you, you don't want to be back in that room, in a desk. And one of the teachers said that she had to put her in a situation where her back wasn't against, wasn't to the door, for fear of someone coming up behind her. So
Mhm.
talk a little bit about the trauma that, some of these young girls experience, and why they wouldn't necessarily want to be back in certain situations, and the,
Yeah.
and the
So
theme of trauma in the film itself.
yeah, and so when we talk about the trauma that young people are experiencing in schools, like, school is where they're spending the majority of their their childhood, right? And if that's not a safe space, if I'm actually reaching out for help and you're saying no, if I go to you and say this is happening to me and you like ignore me, why would I keep going and put myself in some place that's not safe, right? And so with the trauma, it's like, hey, well, where do I go? And like Shakara, you know, her situation, she was already part of a system that was supposed to protect her. And the system that's supposed to protect her harmed her. So it's like, well, where do I get my safety now? Right. And so if we don't feel safe, what is it? And you know, y'all pray about me, right? So the hierarchy, Maslow's
Maslow's
hierarchy,
hierarchy.
the first thing is feeling safe. Like basic needs is safety. And if I don't feel safe, I'm not gonna purposely put myself in places where I feel unsafe, right? And so, and then with Naya, she's just like, no, I got arrested for this because y'all always say if I see something, say something. I saw harm happening to a child and I end up in an adult prison. You put me in a paddy wagon. Why would I want to come back? Nobody came to my aid. Nobody. So why would I step foot into that school again? And we see it in so many places where, you know, going back and forth to different states where things are happening. It's like if everything I do, you're going to look at me, and Ben talks about it. I'm not putting words in his mouth. I'm using his words. If you see me as criminal just because I speak out, like I'll not only will I silence myself, I'll just leave altogether. And so that just builds the I'm not wanted, I'm not seen, I'm not heard, I'm not valued, I'm not welcome. And then what does that build in you? And so we're watching it across the nation. This was not the first, it was not the last. And you know, unfortunately, even through the pandemic, we saw it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very unfortunate, even through this time where we have had this racial reckoning, so to speak. There have
Mhm.
been situations where we've seen school resource officers still attack young people and put them in situations that, you know, for him to talk about the fact that he's a police officer, regardless, he's a police officer and he's supposed to
Mhm.
be there, right, to serve and protect and make sure that, you know, the situation is diffused. There was no diffusing of that situation by any stretch of the imagination, from the teacher, from the assistant principal, from the school resource officer. No one was there to try to diffuse that situation. And it didn't have to escalate to the point that it did, at least from my view. And I know from a
Right.
lot of other people's view, it didn't have to escalate from that. And there, as he said, there are people who, you know, were on his side, who thought that what he did was right. And there's still people who think that what he did was right. And his inability to step back from the situation and say, well, maybe what I did wasn't right.
And how could it look different, right? And I think one of the things, um, going back to like the office, the principal, right? I mean, the teacher himself, right? Shakar was absolutely right. According to state law, her IEP, if she needed her resource teacher by law, she should have had that right. So
Mhm.
he violated her rights to start with, and nobody ever addresses that. And when
Right.
she stands, when she speaks for herself, because you never saw her get upset, you never see her get loud. She sat there, right? She's like, no, according, this is what it's supposed to be for me. I'm following the rules. But
Mhm.
then we see everything else. Like, so how, you know, like you hear Josh talk about it and say, well, it could have been like, you get your detention slip and we're gonna deal with this after school. But to call administrator, then principal, then SRO for a child who, and we did our research and we did our work, right? There was never a cell phone, who wouldn't give up her cell phone. And if you saw, the class was not disrupted at all. The disruption happened once everybody kept getting called in, because I'm sorry, there's also gender bias, especially not just racial and gender. Black girl, how dare you go against what I say?
Right.
Period. Black girl, how dare you? And that's why Janae's work was so powerful in this film, to talk about the historical context of what's happening in the South and the things that we don't talk about, like, and threading that out. So yeah, Shakara was violated from the beginning, and all we saw is her being wronged. Like, she's in the
Right.
wrong.
Right, right. And I think that that's an important point to make, that she asked to see her counselor, and by law,
Mhm.
she should have been granted that access. And
Yep.
for him to not to say no, and then turn around and do this to call all these people in. It's like, well, if you had just done what you were supposed to do from the beginning, so there, the failure started there, right? So if you had just done what you were supposed to do from the beginning, you would not have suspected that she was looking at a cell phone or she was typing a message to the counselor. And so
Right.
to get to that whole implicit bias that also came up in the documentary, what bias did this teacher have against the student as a Black girl? What were his biases that allowed him to call in, to think, to for him to think that that's okay to call in someone else that can handle this situation?
And as we were doing the work, and we're, even as before I met the film crew, is even me just asking questions. Some of the things that came up was that the social worker that they were supposed to call was busy. So we got to think about all the things that happened before. And then when we look at the timeline, I think it was like 15 minutes before the class was actually going to be over. So I think all those things we do have to ask ourselves, like, really, teacher? But I remember coming, and this was early on, it's probably like 2 weeks after the incident or the assault. I'm gonna call it what it was, the assault.
Mhm.
And I had a teacher tell me, had he not done that, all the kids think they can get away with stuff all the time. I was like, what? Hold up. You got to make an example so kids won't think that they can just do anything if we keep letting them get away with everything. And I was like, hold up. And so I think all those biases, and I'm saying this not just with white teachers and white officers, like when it comes to Black children, they're always getting the punitive action. They don't get the same grace and space that their counterparts get.
Right, right. I had was telling you before, when I first started doing some of this work, criminal justice work, I was working with Advancement Project, and
Mhm.
Judy Brown Dianis and I had gone to Florida, where there were so many instances of school resource officers attacking kids, and there was that situation where the school resource officer had put I think she was 4 years old, the little girl,
Mhm.
in the back
Yeah.
seat of the police car in handcuffs. And so we had gone down to Florida, and we were sitting in a courtroom, and I saw all of the Black and brown kids, Black girls and boys,
Yeah.
coming in shackles, right? In shackles around the
Yeah.
waist and their ankles, and they're just marching them all in. And if there was one white one in the bunch of 50, that was a lot, right?
Yeah.
And we sat there in the courtroom for a while, and there was this young girl who was in front of the judge, and she had, I think, missed school. It was something really minor. And the defense attorney said, well, Your Honor, she was staying with her sister, but her mother died. And they just glossed over that her
Mhm.
mother died. Like, oh my, I'm like, wait a minute, wait a minute. Did they just say her mother died? When did her mother die? Did her mother die and then she didn't make it to school? At what point did her mother die? Was it the week before she didn't go to school, or did it happen after? Like, what were the sequence of events here? And the sister couldn't, take care of her. The sister was kind of young also. And I was sitting there visibly upset because I couldn't even imagine that this girl was in front of a judge talking about the fact that she didn't go to school. Her mother died. I just kept making those two connections. And I remember I was 9 when my mother died, and my sisters raised me. And all I could think of was that I was that little girl.
Mhm.
All I could
Yeah.
think of
And
was that was
let's
me.
go and take it back even further. Why am I sitting in a courtroom because I didn't go to school? Right? You're saying that I'm being punished for not being in school because I'm supposed to be in school, but now you want to like incarcerate me. I'm
Mhm.
still not going to be in school. So, like,
Right,
really, what are we saying here? Right? And
right,
so, one of the things through with the disturbing of schools law, it's a form of that in like 26 states. It's not just the no tolerance policy, But that was another, like one of the third largest arrests was disturbing the schools law, and it could have been anything. So, I'm rolling my eyes at a teacher. My teacher feel I'm being disrespectful and disruptive. So I call the SRO in, and the minute they're calling, minute law is called in, here's what we get. And so when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, when we talk about push out, these are all the ways it's happening. It's like, how are we creating laws in schools where kids can't get arrested on the streets from them? Because we don't do truancy. We're not knocking at the door, say you didn't show up at school today, but I get to school, then you arrest me. So why would I go to school? It's a possibility that I might get arrested. And so like, and the ages are getting lower and lower. Like, oh, she attacked the teacher. No, she's 4, she's having a tantrum. We know how to deal, but now the teacher feels afraid, and we got to protect the teacher. We have to protect the teacher. And it's this thing where it's like children, Black and brown children, just don't get to experience childhood and get to experience the developmental growth that we know we all go through. It's like, nope, they're wrong. They've always been wrong. And the cases are larger in the South. We see it more. There is nationwide, but when we look at the ways it shows up in the South, I've been in Florida, girl slammed unconscious for about to fight. Fight never took place. Another girl tased because two boys were about to were harassing her and actually laid hands on her in the lunchroom. And when she defended herself because nobody else did, she's tased, right? We see it in when y'all saw Breonna Baker. She's coming to pick up her homework. She's coming after school. And because she didn't move fast enough, she slammed twice. We got case after case. And what's happening is we're seeing it more with Black and brown female bodies, right? And I think that's something else that we really want to look at when it's talking about the harm that's happening to Black women and girls across the nation and across, like this everywhere. But, our focus is here, but it's happening everywhere. And it's like, at some point we have to stop and say, wait a minute, if children are our future, what are we going to do to protect our future? That means protecting all our children.
Right. Exactly. I'm going to open the lines up for anyone who, you may not even have a question. You just want to make a statement about the film. I see some folks putting stuff in the chat, but I want to ask you, when you talk about one of the statistics that came out was 300,000 kids arrested. It's like, do y'all have 300,000 kids in school? How many? I mean, when you think about 300,000 kids arrested in South Carolina alone, was that statistic from?
No, that was national. It was 30 in South Carolina and like 300 throughout the nation. And when we talk about what they're being arrested for, one of the things is that we get to talk about economic injustice as well, right? And so I get arrested, I can spend 90 days in jail, or I pay this fine. If my mother can't pay rent, she can't pay my fine. So where do I end up? School to prison pipeline. It's not a linear thing. It's not just this easy thread. People not looking. We just think, oh, this child shot up a school. And no, these kids aren't shooting up schools. They're not doing any of that. They're not getting taken to Burger King, as Carrie said. They're not getting that.
Yes.
Jakara didn't get that grace, right? Most of these kids aren't getting this grace. They're not they're getting Black and brown kids, and we're watching it. And my focus is Black girls. We're watching it more and more. Their bodies are being harmed. So when we talk about that trauma, and then I'm being arrested for the trauma that you created for me. Naya, for a long time, Naya was like, I can't stand to hear a siren. Trauma.
Yeah. So let me ask you, what are the girls up to now? If you can share anything about them.
Well, Naya is, you saw Naya's working, and both girls, I'm just going to say both girls are just trying to create a life beyond the assault, right? And the arrest. There's what do I do now? Because they're now going into adulthood, right? They're in their 20s, 2021, and trying to figure out, how do I live beyond this? I always tell them, that moment happened, but it doesn't have to be the rest of your life. How do you take this? And like I tell Shakira all the time, there's all the evidence shows that you have nothing but everything ahead of you. That should have never happened to any child, but that doesn't have to be your trajectory for life. as long as we step up as adults and start changing systems and start really supporting our young people in a way where they can thrive.
Right, right. Well, that's good. That's good. Because we saw at the end where Shakaro got her GED, and that was exciting. And she was getting
Yes.
one-on-one support, you know, a tutor helping her through whatever it was that she was studying. And I'm with her in terms of math. I mean, I was never never
Yeah.
good at math, but then there were other areas that I was good at. And I had an issue with a teacher in history, and I love history. And so to think that that teacher could have deterred my willingness and wantingness to look at history and to want to learn more, I just, you know, being able to have people around you supporting you, I think
Right.
is encouraging you, is what a lot of these young folks aren't getting. So talk a little bit about Every Black Girl and what you are doing outside of this situation that occurred. What are you doing? We saw the awards show, or the awards presentation that you did, and, you know, going to the court and making sure that those charges against those young girls didn't stick, because that's the other thing, right? A lot of these kids end up with things on their records they don't even realize, and then they go to
Yeah.
get a job, and then they can't get a job because there's something on their record, right? And
Speak
so,
about
and then
it.
it didn't get sealed because they were juvenile. So talk a little bit about what Every Black Girl is doing.
Well, so the pandemic stopped a lot of stuff, but one of the things is that we really wanted, spent a whole lot of time like asking the girls what kind of programming they wanted, what did they want to see. And so we were doing Saturday programs, and it was programs where they can learn about advocacy. They can learn about like what does it mean to stand and do the protest and everything. But for me, it was really about where can you go and just have childhood. So they would come and they would have like poetry or arts or music or dance, whatever whatever activities they want to do. So we created Saturday programs. And during the pandemic, we actually opened up a site to support families who couldn't leave their kids at home. So the kids were doing virtual learning from our site. So they were still logging on to their classrooms, but they were in a safe space. Our whole thing is creating safety for Black girls and youth, right? Because we work with boys and everybody. We did international before COVID. We always wanted the girls to know no matter where you land in the world, you belong. So we did a lot of international travel so they can like meet other girls from other countries. So we've been able to take the girls out of the country to experience life beyond where they live and let them know that no matter your financial situation, you can always, just like exposure, right? We do leadership. We do like, we call it like adult allies. And so we did leadership programs for adults to like really work with adults so they can heal their trauma, so they can actually be with young people around their trauma, right? Currently, we are working on a boarding school for Black girls, not a punitive place where girls who just get in trouble. If you remember the show Facts of Life, I love that show. And I want to create that space for Black girls because, there's times when home is not the safest place. And that was another thing that came up in the pandemic which made us open up our site, because for most kids, that's the place where they're eating during the day. That's their safe space. Sometimes home is where harm is happening. So what happens when you're at home where the harm is happening? So you're there all day now. So really creating safety in that way. We're still looking at policy change, advocacy in that way. And then being with community and like responding to community needs. Like we're really proud to say that during COVID, when folks weren't able to like pay rent or they were getting laid off, we were able to like disperse funds to family. We were helping pay rent. We were providing utility bills because, everybody's like, oh, here's the food. But if I don't have a gas stove, if the gas ain't on, electricity ain't on, I can't cook none of this, right? And so we were able to support families in that way. Unfortunately, the one thing that, I'm grateful that we were able to do it, but it hurts my heart. But because of health insurance or lack of like life insurance, we were able to help people, bury family members that passed of COVID. And so we do a lot because we're responding to community need. But right now, we're focusing on the boarding school and really looking at what does safety look like for young people right now during this global pandemic, and what is continuing education, and what is like, because there was a learning gap. And so how do we make sure that educational needs are still met for young people?
So when do you anticipate the boarding school? And is it they're going to be there in South Carolina? Or are you looking at another site?
Well, right now we're going to start in South Carolina. You
Mhm.
know, I ain't Oprah. Can't do all that. I can't do all that. So
Maybe
we're going to
Oprah will
start
hear you.
and so we're going to start in South Carolina. And like I said, it's going to be a space where girls who just need a safe space to learn can come and learn, because they've had such negative interaction with schools.
Mhm.
Um, and like some of the girls, like we hope that we can get them, you know, feeling safe enough and liberated enough, because it's going to be the sanctuary of radical liberation. So they
I
can,
love
you know,
that.
because education is the key to liberation. So to get them re-engaged and fall back in love with school, because most kids are excited and they want to go to school, they want to learn. We interrupt that process. And I think that's one of the things that's, when I work with adults, to say it's not about blame, but what's our responsibility for the next
Mhm.
generation? What, and the
Mhm.
generations that's beyond the next generation, right? And so I don't have a date yet. We have the land, like I had the blueprints put up, but with COVID, so many people, you know, the surveyors, all those kind of things. So hopefully by December we'll have a full building standing, and by fall
Mhm.
we'll be able to take in young people.
Okay, sounds good. So, one thing you just mentioned was it's up to us, and one thing you say in the film was that they were born whole, perfect, and complete, and it's up to us to keep it that way, because they are. There's, a baby is born, and there's, joy, and folks, you just want
Yes.
to see that child thrive, and then somewhere
Mhm.
along the way, either something that happens in the home or something outside of the home that affects that child. And it is our responsibility, right, to make sure that
Yes.
that child is protected and that that child is wanted and needed. And so I thought that that was really poignant what you said.
Yeah,
We're going
and
to
we
get to
really,
the. Go ahead.
no, I
Sorry.
was just saying we really need to look at, you know, every child is our child, right? Because I have this thing, like I work with, because I never know if you're gonna meet one of my nieces or nephews, and what's
Mhm.
that child who's gonna be hanging out with. So it's up to us to, like, every child gets to be seen
Yeah.
and heard and felt and loved upon and taken care of. And
Yeah. So there's a couple of questions that have come up.
okay.
Let's see, Essie, I apologize if you've already covered this, but do you see that discouraging Black children from returning to school is just one of the multiple tentacles of the school to prison pipeline monster?
Right now, what we're watching, I just left Florida, and I was checking in on some of the families that I've been supporting there. And I was going by, and it was like 10 o'clock. And I saw kids sitting at the bus stop. And I was like, well, what's going on? What's going on? And it was like, we don't have any bus drivers. We don't have this. That's why parents are just keeping their kids at school. I mean, at home, right? And it's just like, but what are we doing to ensure their academic needs? So if we can keep a child out of school, tell me their options.
Right.
Tell me their options. If I'm in the third grade, which is a pivotal year for all children, if I'm in third grade and you telling me to just stay at home, by the time I get back to school, if I get back, I'm reading below level. All my standards are below level. The standards are changing. One of the girls I'm working with now, 10th grade, and she goes to the get, where her mom sends her to the gas, like, go put $15 on pump 5, give her a $20 bill. She came back and said, should I have change? Because they gave me $5. Did they mess up? They can't do it. When
Basically.
talking about writing a complete sentence, and one of the things, not just not having kids return to school, just pushing kids through. That's another key to the school to prison. We're going to just push them through. I don't want to deal with them,
Mhm.
so I'm going to push them through.
Right.
And this, we don't expect much. Don't expect
Right.
much from Black and brown kids, because they really can't learn at that level. So those are still like some of those like things when we talk about, when they really talk, we were talking about the 40s and 50s and 60s, and they were like, oh, Black people just can't learn, that's just who they are. Those thoughts still, there's not high expectations.
Well, in terms of what the woman, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, that was going to, to the various swamp areas
Janae
that they were,
Davis.
Janae, that she was talking about, how they're trying to hide and push down the culture and make sure that all of this stuff is hidden, and they want to talk about the fact that slavery does no longer exist, but it's all the vestiges of that, right? That continue to keep people down and ensure that kids don't learn, and that they end up, when you don't learn and when you're not in school, like you say, what are the choices? And the choice is you do something that's going to land you in jail subsequent after that, prison, right? Because you don't have options. If you don't have an education, if you can't count an ad, you can't even work at the dollar store, right? So pushing kids out, that school to prison pipeline, that's just a way to make sure, okay, we're going to get this number of kids and make sure that they get shifted and end up in the prison industrial complex.
Right. And like, let's be very clear, this is capitalistic as well.
Yes.
This is
because we know they're listed on the stock market.
This is a market, right? We got to fill those beds. Like, even we did the raise the age where a child couldn't be charged or incarcerated can't be sent to an adult prison for nonviolent crimes, right? So everybody's doing the raise the age, because in some states it was 13, some states it was 15, 16. So we raised the age. The first response was, let's build more youth prisons. Not let's create some alternatives. Let's figure out what's needed so we can stop that altogether, right? And like, why are we arresting kids for just doing like childhood behavior?
Yeah. So here's the next question. With the prevalence of domestic violence in society in general and the communities of color in particular, should we be raising the awareness of self-esteem within the larger community to improve awareness and safety?
Yeah, we can't do this work without involving community. I don't do any work without working with community or families, right? I can work with all the kids I want to. If I'm not working with the adults, we still missing the mark. And once again, if we're not healing, there's a lot of us adults walking around with childhood trauma, internalized oppression, and all these things. And then it has to come out somewhere. And most of the time it's coming out on a child, right? And so we have to do that work. I think even as a Black community, there's a lot of healing we have to do. Everybody want to go like, what about the Black on Black crime? Well, it's because we have unhealed trauma, and it's time for us to get into the healing business. And so, yeah, we have to bring everybody in. And when we talk about domestic violence, we see teen dating violence because it's learned behavior and it goes generation. And we have to like really start working really hard to break those curses. We have to get into the healing business.
So this question goes to that as well. And this question is from Dr. Deborah Bernal. Are you doing any African cultural history or rite of passage programming for the girls in boarding school?
Yes, we will be working with Dr. Gloria Boutte, she's a tenured professor at the University of South Carolina. She's on my board. She's gonna we're gonna really be bringing that in. Like, that's one of the reasons, like, we had took them to like South Africa, we took them to Antigua, but it's really one of those things to break that, oh, I'm not African or I'm not Black, to really reconnect them to the core of who they are and the whole history of them beyond enslavement, but the whole history of who they are. And we do, we call it Legends in the Making, where we address some things there. But yeah, we're gonna take a deeper dive, and it has to be a part of it. Like, so beyond self-esteem and feeling good, but really like, how do we take kids back to the core of them?
Right. And I think that that's important because a lot of kids, what they are learning about slavery and about people from Africa is so limited that they don't think that there were kings and queens and all this other stuff happened in Africa prior to them taking us from the continent, right? and ending up here in the Americas. I won't just say the United States, because we know that slavery was South America, it was everywhere. And so I think that that's really important, that them understanding from whence they came, since many of us don't know where we came from. I mean, we do ancestry and it's just like, okay, you come from Congo. Well, where where
And
we don't have the language
reconnecting,
and we don't have that connection.
and reconnecting, like dismantling the hate and not want to be connected to Africa.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so I think that's working itself as well, like the anti-Blackness, where we can go to Africa, but we go there and folks are bleaching their skin because there's still a disconnection. So the anti-Blackness that happens, the gender biases that happen, the classism. So let's be real. Let's talk real talk. Classism within our own communities.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so breaking all those different things down, where it's just like, oh, no, you don't have to, like, I tell kids all the time, I'm so excited because, we're 6 years old and some of our, what we call our day ones, we got about 10 graduating from high school this year. And they like, can you believe I'm applying to college? And for the first time, not feeling like I just want to go far away from home, but saying like, oh, I can go to colleges close to home and still say, I want to come back home and do some buildup of the community. Like I tell kids, if you want to go away to college, I want you to go away, but don't do it running from don't do it thinking you're running away from something, because these communities happen everywhere. And so if you're going to go away, I want you to go away because this has the best program for you, not so you can get further away from whence you come. So like, yeah, really doing that community work and doing that, the rites of passage, the reconnection, the how do we build them up, like, but the social emotional support, all the things, like it's not one thing to do. We got to do all the things, the things.
Yeah. It's very important to do all the things. That is for sure. And to do all the things, as you said, not just for young people, but the adults, right? Because there are adults. There was an adult that came into that classroom, a Black adult that came into that classroom.
There were 2 Black adults that came into that classroom, 2.
Oh, I thought the teacher was not.
The teacher was white. He called administrator who's Black, who called the principal who's Black, who called the SRO.
Okay, I missed that part where I saw the assistant principal was there. I didn't see that the principal had come in too. Yeah, and so there's that bias, right? That against that internalized racism. Well, I'm dealing with these kids, and we're gonna call all the systems on them. So it's our work as well that we have to do. That there can't be this fear always of our Black kids. So yeah, that is very poignant to get to that point too, where we're working on ourselves as well as working on our kids, and that trauma that happened to young people by adults that just carries on into some people's adulthood.
Yeah, and that's why I often tell people, like, yes, I want police-free schools, police in schools, and even Ben said it, right? I didn't say it. Y'all heard it out of his mouth. Police should not be in school. But I also let people know I want to remove policing from schools, the different way adults police children. So policing takes on a lot, like, I'm a little thicker, so I can't wear the skirt, so I'm at wrong from this, or the girls can't wear this, but boys can wear, the way we police Black bodies, all the things like, I have an opinion, so now you're policing how I dress. Like, people may not like the way I move my hands, so I'm at fault for that. So you're policing how I express myself, how I articulate myself. And so looking at how policing takes place, because it always takes somebody to call an officer in. So policing starts way before an officer gets in.
Right. Yeah. So Essie's asked another question. How can I find out about the work you're doing in Florida?
Just email me. I'll tell you. You in Florida? Because I need some help out there, child. Is the way
we do know some people in Florida.
If they give another child an IEP and send another child to a mental health facility and all this other stuff, it's a lot happening.
Yeah, Essie's in Florida.
Okay.
So I will connect. I'll connect you guys. So, I want to ask you. I have more questions to ask you, but I don't want to keep people like too late. But I want to know how else can we support every Black girl? You're trying to build a building, so I know money is one thing you need. How can we support your efforts?
So there's I don't know if you have the link because I don't have it, and I'm gonna get tech savvy. I'm not there yet, but yeah, you can donate via PayPal to Every Black Girl Inc. That's our PayPal link. And you at everyblackgirl1@gmail.com. You can send us a check at 4041 Highland Park Drive, Columbia, South Carolina. I wish I knew how to do this for y'all. I'm
No, that's
trying.
okay. I'm typing as you talk. 4041 Highland Park Highland Park Drive.
Columbia, South Carolina, 29204. PayPal at everyblackgirl1@gmail.com. And one of the things is that, and yes, the monies, but also if there are schools that you are working in, because we do work, one of the things is that working with schools to like really this work that we do with young people, working with teachers and educators too, to start addressing some of the biases that they may not know of, and we address it in a different way with educators. We've had educators come through our programs who were like ready to quit, and then now they're like at the top of their schools in classes because they have a whole new relationship with students. That's another thing. And then also like just see Black girls, right? Don't look at behavior when you're working with young people, just see them. Like, I think some of the stuff we think I'm not asking anybody, if you see a video, you don't have to get on a plane and drive, and you don't have to go. But there are things that we see happening in our communities. We know it's happening, but we're like, oh, I'll take care of that later. What tomorrow not promised, there's not a later. So, do what you can in your community. Love up on those Black kids in your family. You got friends down the street. Like, those are ways where it actually lends to the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question. Essie, next question, you're going to have to go on to talk. Are you familiar with Dads on Duty, a group of 40 Black men whose presence at a Louisiana school has resulted in ending fighting among students?
Because that's what it looks like. If we can send resources to communities if we can like build resources and build those community supports, it ain't policing. We can take care of our own kids, right? We know the kids know us. We know how to step in. And that's a perfect example of things that we can be doing in our own communities. Go to the school board, even if you don't have kids that in school age range, right? Still go and lend your voice and your expertise, because I'm very clear everybody on this call got a level of expertise that they can bring and a voice, and you can hear. There's going to be some parents there's going to be some folks, and then you can hear and you can like really engage and say, okay, this is what I can do. Every program is looking for mentors. No matter where you are, everybody's always looking for mentors. And I get it. It's the time of COVID, it's all the things, but we got to do all the things. And it's going to take us to like actually step outside ourselves a little bit so we can actually see somebody else. So we can see children as children.
Yeah. Well, Vivian, I want to thank you again so much for agreeing to do this. You did not know who I was last month. And I said, no, I'm going to screen it. And we were able to pull it together. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We will have to talk offline because my biological father's last name is Anderson. And although he came from Honduras, he landed in Brooklyn. So we might be cousins because, we're all related.
So my people, so Brooklyn was the stop. Like, I'm born in Chicago, raised in Detroit. My family from Mississippi, so we that side. Like,
okay,
I ended up in Brooklyn, doing some of the same work. But yeah, I'm not from Brooklyn. But yeah, we still can talk because who knows, right?
Yeah, because they just dropped us off wherever, so there's no telling. Where the Andersons were. So technically, my name would have been Anderson. But I just want to thank you, and this has just been a great conversation. The documentary is great. Where can people see the documentary if they're watching this video after the fact, if they weren't able to watch it with us?
It's on all the live streams. Like Apple, iTunes. I know Prime Video is the one that I really know. That's the
Okay.
easiest folks have been, but it's on all the streaming networks. And that's another thing, like share it, like really like start having, like have some conversation. If you are in sororities or you're in fraternities or if you're in networking groups, like share with folks. Because the one thing that I find so amazing about this film is that you didn't hear from one voice. This could have been a one-sided conversation, right?
Yeah.
You've heard from everybody in the different ways that everybody can like kind of tune in and pitch in, like from the legal side of things, from the academic side of things, from the youth side of things, from the community organizing side of things. And then just hearing from young people. So share it, have conversation, and just, keep standing and being, stand and see Black girls. I'm going to keep saying that because one of the things I tell people, if you notice, and there's no hashtag, but every Black girl is one word because no girl gets to fall through the crack and we don't get to decide which girl is worthy of being a part of every, like
That's
we often
good.
be like every Black girl, then we decide which Black girl is magical. Every Black girl, all of them.
Thank you for making that clarification, because I was putting every Black girl, separating it, but that makes it clear. So it's every Black girl, all one word. Thank you very much. So thank you all for joining us tonight. And
thank you for having me.
It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, last thing, the Every Black Girl Conference is on Saturday. So if you go to our, we have our annual conference. So one thing Naya told me when I first met her was that I said, what can I do for you? She said, if every year we can come back so October 26th was the SALT. So every October we come back and we host a conference where we're doing, like somebody talked about the rites of passage, the self-esteem, we're doing workshops. So this year we're, our second partnering with Justice for Black Girls means every Black girl. So the two organizations come together and it's going to be virtual. So it's on Halloween, is October 31st, Sunday from 12 to 5. And if you go to our IG page or our Facebook page, you'll be able to register from there.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I meant to say that this was the anniversary. This is
October 26th.
So 6 years.
Yep.
6 years,
yep.
7 years.
Six years. October 26th, 2015.
Yeah. Incredible. Incredible. How much has happened from then to here, right? We had Breonna Taylor, we had George Floyd, and so many more. And incidents, the young girl who was just killed by the school resource officer, I think in California, where she was driving away in the car.
The 18-year-old.
She was shot and was brain dead in the hospital. And and
I mean, this year
resource
long,
officer.
We had the girl slammed unconscious. We had the girl tased. During COVID, we had young girls arrested because when the teachers went on camera with them, they said the house was dirty or they thought it was violence in the house and kids weren't showing up and kids were still being arrested. So it doesn't stop. That's why we have to do so much. And I just saw somebody say, yes, Dr. Monique Morris, Push Out. That's another documentary that you really, and I heard you talking about, so this is a must read, people. Can y'all see it? I don't know how to do it. And I know you're gonna be doing it. I don't know how to do it with these filters. There you go, The Rage of Innocence. And the stories in there, and like, just as much as you can, pay attention and like update yourself on what's happening, not just about the deaths we see, the physical deaths we see, watch what's happening with our children, because this is how we continue this system of oppression, this system of white supremacy, because we close our eye because we're saying, oh, they're okay. No, our children are not okay. That's why our country looks the way it is. Our children are not okay.
Yeah. And one of the things that came up in the very beginning was Glenn Beck talking about this could lead to anarchy. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, didn't we just see anarchy in January 6th? Didn't we just see that? And it wasn't by our kids. That was not the anarchy. Right. Nope. So yeah, we know we're constantly bucking up against the system, but we thank you so much for bucking up against the system and doing the work that you do. And have a great night. Blessings, my sister. And yes, we will support.
Yes, and thank you so much for just doing this. I appreciate you so much.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
All right, you too. Bye, everybody.